Okay, let's just dive right in. In today's explainer, we're unpacking something that has a lot of people scratching their heads right now, the E20 ethanol mandate here in India. There is so much noise out there, heavy political debate, and honestly, a lot of sheer frustration from everyday commuters. So, we're going to cut through all those opinions. We're taking a strictly impartial look at the mechanics, the real economics, and what this actually means for you and your vehicle.
Let me ask you this. Have you noticed a sudden drop in your vehicle's fuel efficiency lately? Or, I don't know, maybe you've been having these unexplainable starting issues in the morning, and your mechanic just kind of shrugs and can't figure out why. Well, you absolutely are not alone. All across the country, drivers are waking up to this totally new reality at the petrol pump, and the symptoms are surprisingly consistent across the board.
Just listen to some of these real consumer reports. People are saying their mileage has inexplicably dropped from 12 kilometers per liter all the way down to 9. They're reporting weird starting problems or finding that their fuel pump filters are just completely jamming up out of nowhere. One driver even described the feeling as having ants in the fuel tank, which, man, that is just a bizarre, jittery way for an engine to behave, right? So this brings up a huge central mystery. What exactly has changed at the pump to cause this massive, widespread headache?
Well, the absolutely crucial point here is understanding what is actually going into your tank right now. Because if you think you're buying 100% pure petrol, you're actually not. What you're very likely pumping is E20 fuel. So, what is that? It's a government-mandated blend that contains 80% standard petrol and 20% ethanol. And ethanol is essentially alcohol, made in this specific case mostly from sugarcane juice. So you're paying full price for petrol, but a fifth of that liquid isn't actually traditional petrol anymore.
Now, this definitely didn't happen overnight. India actually started blending ethanol way back in 2003 with just a 5% mix. We called that E5. Then by 2019, that crept up to 10%, or E10. But here is the real kicker. The big transition to E20? That was originally planned for 2030, but that timeline was suddenly compressed, pulling the target all the way forward to 2025. That rapid acceleration is really the major source of all the current friction. When you squeeze a 10-year transition into just 5 years, the infrastructure, and honestly, more importantly, the actual vehicles on the road, they simply do not have the time to adapt.
Now, when consumers complain about this, a very common defense is to say, well, countries like the US or Brazil use ethanol. But let's actually look at the data here. In the USA, where you can find E15 or even E85 blends, those higher ethanol fuels are priced at least 18% cheaper. Why is that? Because ethanol literally has a lower energy density than pure petrol. It means you get less mileage. So, countries like the US offer these substantial discounts to offset that mileage loss and the potential mechanical risks. But here in India, E20 is sold at the exact same price as older fuels, so the consumer is basically absorbing all the risk and the cost of lower efficiency without getting any financial benefit whatsoever. Car manufacturers, of course, have pushed back against the complaints. In a recent government report surveying potential damages, Maruti Suzuki claimed that out of a staggering 28.4 million vehicles serviced last year, 1.5 crore, so 15 million, were older, non-compliant models. And their conclusion? They stated E20 caused absolutely no damage to them, which on the surface sounds incredibly reassuring, right? But wait a second, because this is where we found a pretty glaring contradiction. On one hand, you have this official PR claiming E20 is perfectly safe for older vehicles, but if you actually open up the vehicle warranty manual sitting in your glove box right now, it explicitly states using non-E10 fuel will void the company's responsibility. That is a massive disconnect. I mean, if the fuel is perfectly safe for older cars, why do the instruction manuals shift all the legal and financial risk entirely onto you, the consumer?
And that brings us to a really pivotal question for pretty much anyone driving right now. What happens to the millions of vehicles manufactured before April 1st, 2023? That is the strict cutoff date. Vehicles made after that date, they're legally mandated to be E20 compliant. But vehicles made before it were only built to handle E10. Given that your average car stays on the road for, 10 to 12 years? There are literally millions of cars and bikes out there drinking fuel they were never officially engineered for. To understand why that's such a big deal, we gotta look at the objective science. Yes, on the positive side, ethanol does burn cleaner than petrol. It reduces tailpipe emissions. But, as we mentioned, it holds less energy per liter, which directly explains that frustrating drop in your mileage. But more importantly, it is highly corrosive. Over time, it degrades rubber seals, and it actually damages fuel lines and engine parts in vehicles that weren't specifically built for it. And the trickiest part of all this, the damage is completely silent.
It's not like pouring water in your gas tank where the car just immediately stops. Ethanol degrades your engine slowly over a long period, and it only really reveals itself when the damage is already done.
So, you're probably wondering if it's this risky for millions of cars, why are we even doing it? Well, the main argument for the mandate is economic independence. The government really wants to reduce our reliance on imported oil to save on foreign exchange. But we really need to ask the broader macroeconomic question here. Does blending sugarcane juice into fuel actually solve India's foreign exchange deficit? Like, is this really the ultimate fix for our import dependency?
Let's look at the actual data, because this is where the economic argument gets pretty complicated. India imports about 88% of its oil, but we aren't importing ready-made petrol. We import crude oil. Our domestic refineries take that crude and process it. And here's the thing. Crude oil isn't just used for petrol. We absolutely need it for manufacturing plastics, for the tar on our roads, for aviation fuel, and crucially, for diesel. So blending 20% ethanol into just the petrol supply, it honestly only solves a tiny, tiny fraction of our overall crude oil dependency. We still need all that crude for literally everything else.
And when we look at the environmental reality of producing all this ethanol, we hit a truly staggering number: 3,000 liters. That is how much water it takes to produce just one single liter of first-generation sugarcane ethanol. Sugarcane is a notoriously water-guzzling crop. So yeah, while we might be reducing tailpipe emissions slightly, we are simultaneously converting massive amounts of our precious groundwater into fuel. We really have to ask ourselves if that trade-off actually makes sense for the environment in the long run. Now contrast that massive water usage with this number: 46,000 liters. A dedicated study in Delhi found that 46,000 liters of fuel are wasted purely due to idling traffic at just 117 intersections. I mean, just imagine that. If the true goal here is to save fuel and reduce our foreign exchange deficit, things like fixing our traffic problems, reducing VIP halts, and eliminating engine idling, that could save colossal amounts of fuel without ever having to modify the chemistry of our petrol. You know, the really frustrating part about all of this is that there actually is an incredible, sustainable way to do ethanol, and it was actually part of the original long-term plan. Right now, we're heavily relying on first-generation ethanol, which uses sugarcane and food grains. That means it competes with our food supply, and it's incredibly water-intensive. But the real game changer? That's second-generation ethanol. This stuff is made from agricultural waste, like paddy straw and corn cobs. Guys, this is the exact same agricultural waste that gets burned every single winter, heavily contributing to the severe air pollution in cities like Delhi. If we could turn that pollution-causing waste into fuel, we'd literally solve two massive problems at once. So, where do we go from here? Well, based on the data, the macro alternatives are pretty clear. And importantly, they don't involve burdening everyday consumers and their older vehicles. First, we could invest heavily in EV charging infrastructure to genuinely transition away from combustion engines altogether. Second, like we saw with those 46,000 liters of wasted fuel, we need to redesign our cities to improve public transport, reduce traffic, and eliminate idling. And third, we absolutely need to fast-track the technology for that second-generation agricultural waste ethanol. These are systemic, root-level solutions that genuinely fix the fuel crisis.
So I'll leave you with something I want you to really think about. If this rushed E20 experiment fails, if people's older cars start breaking down and they feel forced into taking on all this financial risk without any transparency, how will we ever rebuild consumer trust in the future of green energy? The transition to sustainability is absolutely vital, no doubt about it, but it fundamentally requires the public to be on board. And trust is incredibly hard to earn back once it's lost. So keep questioning the data, keep looking at the mechanics, and as always, stay curious.